legitimacy of a democracy. It is sometimes the only public advocate that stands in the way of state monopolization of power inside states. We believe that when the fundamental goal of the media is to challenge the authority of actors, to challenge the authority of the state, and to be the last stand for the people that are in these societies, we believe it is fundamentally, principally wrong, as well as practically wrong, to allow the state to have a monopoly of power in the media. This is why we are against the state owning these media corporations. So before I get into my argumentation, I have two things to do. First of all, I'm going to explain our stance in the debate. Second of all, get into definitions. And then first of all, I'm going to talk about the principle and the purpose of democracy and the media intertwined, and how they fundamentally have separate goals. And then secondly, talking about the quality of the media and the mechanisms that these governments are going to use in order to have a monopoly on the media. So first of all, our stance. We are against majority parties and entire governments owning media organizations. We support a variety of other actors owning media corporations, which can include individuals. We also believe that democratic states and political parties should not be allowed to sponsor, donate, or subsidize these organizations, because we believe that is an extension of our principle. But we'd also like to specify that this debate is not about the mechanism of how we would shut down current government control of media-run organizations. It is about whether or not we prefer a world, and we believe that a world is more fair, that does not have these media organizations controlled by the government. Also acknowledge that both sides in this debate have to play with a variety of actors, and that we acknowledge that not every state has an incentive to directly control their media. But it's not about individuals controlling their media. It is about the potential for these governments to maintain absolute power and authority, not only in the status quo, but in the future. Before I get into my definitions, sure.
Would you allow governments to regulate private media outlets and issue press releases?
We think that that it's fundamentally wrong for the government to organize how the media can act in specific ways. We do think that there is, however, a distinction between the government sending out a press release and a government owning a media corporation. We think that the distinction is that a media corporation is viewed as a check and balance and a form of absolute knowledge coming from the society rather than an individual government. We think that it's a little bit different under their side of the house. So first of all, we are acknowledging this House as democratic states, both fledgling and developed democracies, and media organizations are organizations that broadcast information and journalism to the public. We think that this is fundamentally organizations that follow the principles of journalism as well. So first of all, getting into our principle. We think that the purpose of democracy is to represent the majority of citizens. We believe that there are three key pillars that are associated with this. First of all, there is legitimacy, both perceived and actual, that is required in order for a government to be legitimately democratic. Secondly, there must be checks and balances on this government. This is what leads to accountability that ensures that a developing or ensured democracy can be considered accountable. And there must be free and fair elections that are reported on and that are identified as free and fair elections in the public. We think that the media is supposed to be providing information and acting as a check and balance, which is actually fundamentally against the purpose of governments, which is to represent the majority. We think it is immoral to use taxpayer dollars to fund this sort of media organization that not every single citizen is requiring, using, or supporting, and don't see their views reflected in. We think that there are a few reasons why the media should not serve this goal. First of all, we think that it is uncomparable with the goals of democracy. It should be able to report on the decisions and be able to make sure that it's catering to as many people as possible. This also means reporting on minority groups, for example, something that a government that is democratic doesn't typically focus on. We also think that the goal of governments is fundamentally to get re-elected. So we think it's absolutely critical that the media remains a separate part of that organization. We think that there are two goals of the media. First of all, to maintain information that ensures that there's fair and free, to ensure that individuals can make informed choices in their day-to-day lives. This means small choices as well as big choices, like choosing who to elect in government. We also think that the fundamental goal of the media is to act as a check on authority. This is the fundamental principle that we are pushing on our side of the House. Why does this not happen if governments are able to control the quality of media? I'll take you, actually. Go ahead.
Ma'am, some people did not vote for the governments that happened to be elected. By your logic, does that mean that they don't need to pay income taxes to the government?
No, I don't think that's true, because the government provides lots of other services that are universal to everybody. We think that that is a principle that stands in our side of the House. It's not really comparative for you to say. Okay, on the quality of media, we think that there are several unique mechanisms that governments have an incentive to use and are actually likely to use in order to enforce that the media is only pushing their narrative. First of all, the mechanism I already mentioned is that governments want to get re-elected. We think that this is specifically problematic in states where nascent democracies and individuals have a large degree of power. My second speaker is going to be talking about this more specifically in authoritarian states or states moving towards authoritarianism from democracies. We think that there are 5 main mechanisms that they can use to control the media. First of all, subsidizing mass amounts of money. So this is also for governments that are subsidizing but also owning. We think that this has 2 key impacts. First of all, that threatening to remove funding can mean that you can extort these media companies into doing what you want them to do. That can mean preventing them from reporting on key issues that you think are a little bit too sensitive for your government to deal with. But secondly, in less completely extortive cases, where the government doesn't explicitly say, we don't want you to report on these things, there is always the explicit knowledge that the government is the one that is owning your media company, and if you start doing things that are anti-government, they may start changing leadership, for example, which is why you're likely to make decisions that would be applicable in what your government would want to enforce, even if they are not completely corrupt. Secondly, they can control the kinds of reporters and reporting that goes on in these states. We think an example of this is the BJP, where there was a reporter that was harshly criticizing the BJP and she miraculously disappeared and was never heard from again. We think that the government is able to do this even more when there are no other free news organizations in the state, and I'll be going on to prove why that happens. Secondly, we think that it can prevent the kind of journalism that occurs within these states. Investigative journalism is incredibly important in order to undermine the power structures of government and the power structures of other bodies and corporations. When a government can say this is anti-our values and you are not allowed to do investigative reporting, this has a few harms. An example of this is government-controlled media in Brazil was accused of covering up President Miguel Terav's corruption scandals, even though the media had received video evidence of him in these corruption scandals, and they chose not to report on it because it was media controlled. Thirdly, they can set the mandate of the media. This is the kinds of reporting that actually can occur within the media, the kinds of stories they do. Fourthly, and this is actually crucial on their side, they have to respond to this, they have the capacity to shut down and crowd out other media sources. When the government can extra fund specific kinds of media that they own, that means that they can crowd out smaller media companies that they don't want to have a say within the government. This means that they can actively control the free speech of individuals, but also the amount of information that is getting out to the public. We think that there are lots of impacts of this. One, we think that states can emphasize their own policy. This can be things like demonizing immigrants or misframing opposition parties to try to push their own narrative. They can try to lie to the public in a variety of other ways. They can try to have profit incentives and push these companies because they know they can shut them down. Fundamentally, on our side of the house, we recognize that even if there is not a threat in every single media in every single state, it is never justifiable to give a government absolute control of the narrative that occurs within a society. And that when you do that, you are no longer a democratic state because you are removing the ability of individuals to make decisions and you're removing the legitimacy of a state to actually function. We are proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the first speaker of the opposition for their speech. I would like to invite the first speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
Because there will still be interference by political biases. The difference is you cannot formally trace these alliances. When you have people like Sean Hannity, who die at the White House every single week with Donald Trump, who then goes on to write articles about him in his praise, or people like Rupert Murdoch, who continue to hold strong political links, it's just untrue to argue that our side is the only side with political links. We think it's far worse on your side when you consider it a point of information. You have no regulation, so your side is the one that is stand for a poor quality of news. news. What is our stance in opposition? First, we believe that democratic states should own and run media organizations. Second, this does not mean that we have a state monopolization of media as their side claims. To be clear, we will not ban private media organizations because we envision a world where private media organizations run alongside government-run public media organizations. And to be clear, this is perfectly consistent with our burden in this motion before they tell us that we're running a soft stance. Because our argument is that government-run media organizations provide a unique benefit in complementing private media organizations. This is because they aren't profit-oriented. It means that A, they provide low-cost access to good quality programming, and B, there is fact-checking to ensure that content is responsibly produced. All of which can't happen in their world because they have no regulations whatsoever on the quality of media that is being produced. Third, this policy will run just like any other public utility service that governments provide in all cases, and it will be run by civil servants. It's important to recognize that this creates a degree of independence from the political state of governance. Because the government provides the money, but there is obviously a difference between the incumbent party running the country and the concept of a state and its independent civil service. This already happens in the status quo today. Public schools are funded by governments. But independent civil servants sets the curriculum. So the role of governments probably comes in effect that governments can more stringently regulate the public media organizations through fact-checking, for instance. Fourth, how will the content of these public media outlets be decided? Governments may create their own news programs that are often held to higher standards. They may also buy over licensing rights to popular TV shows and movies. They can also focus on local programming. We're going to forward 3 arguments. First, that our side increases access to media. Second, that we raise the quality of media. And third, in our second speaker, that we increase public trust in news outlets. Before that, let's deal with that case. The first argument they bring to us is a moral defense on whether or not it is immoral to use taxpayer money to fund the media. We think this makes no sense because in every single government, we use public funds, but it doesn't mean that every single person benefits from it. We fund public schools, but we can also have people going to private schools. So this argument simply does not make any sense. So that all of the 5 mechanisms all assume there are no other news sources on our side. I've gone to you my policy, but that's simply not true. Second thing they bring to us is this argument about checks and balances to prevent government outreach. Before I go on, yes.
Would you allow governments to monitor their own elections?
No, obviously not, because I just told you in every democracy there is a split between an independent civil service and the government running the country. Deal with my analysis on that. Back to my argument. So they want to talk about, clearly, not really democratic states, because I think in first speaker they try to muddy the waters. So let's deal with this. In democratic states, there are institutional checks to ensure that we do have checks and balances. First, we often have a robust opposition party presence. So if the Trump government manipulates the media, I'm pretty sure the Democratic Party won't just stand idly. Second, we have the check balance of the ballot box, so clearly the people won't stand for this manipulation. And third, we can also have constitutional constraints on government powers. So that side is really debating on the margins when they say that they want to talk about democratic states who are sliding into autocracy. I heard that in the first speech. I find it incredibly incredulous. Because this argument, this debate, has to be about democracies that are truly functioning. You can't muddy the waters like that. Deal with your burden. But even if we accept their argument about why governments are self-interested, it's precisely why states will try to be as neutral as possible. Because if having hugely skewed news means that you alienate a huge base of political support that gets people to have backlash against you. This deals with the argument about a BJP reporter who was fired, because obviously there was huge backlash and protests on the street when people found that the government is manipulating media organizations. On to my first argument then on how our side increases access to media. The thrust of this argument is that profit incentive of private media decreases access to media. Why? Recognize that media competition to lower prices among private media organizations is a myth. The first reason for this is that the same people own many media organizations. So for instance, Rupert Murdoch, who has a global media enterprise who owns Fox News, Sky News, and The Sun, for instance. Second, even if there are many media outlets, they often collude to set prices very high. So these 2 reasons show that there is a lack of competition. This is important because no competition means you have no incentive to lower prices to ensure that media is accessible to many people in society. So even if some private news organizations have good quality journalism, they are often out of reach to everyday people on the ground. And the reason why they do this is because of their profit incentive. Because they need to cover the cost of their operations and make profit by charging high subscription fees. What are the impacts? First, this means that good quality news outlets and news media are out of reach because of paywalls, for instance. So cable TV subscriptions are often hugely expensive. It costs $200 to register for access to cable TV to access CNN, NBC, and ABC in America. And you need to pay monthly fees on top of that. Imagine how the average Joe is going to access news on their site. But even in the case of online news, there are often paywalls. So almost every single news outlet charges money to access these articles. People like New York Times and Foreign Policy all collect money. The second impact is what you have access to as a regular person is instead low quality programming. Because if private media organizations want to be free but still make profit, they have to have advertisements, for instance. They have to have clickbait articles, all of which decreases the quality of news on their side. What is the comparative on our side? We have state-run media organizations that are far more accessible because they are free. As I told you, the provision of state media will function like any other provision of public utilities. There will be no profit incentive here. So our side functions really like how governments already provide private schools that already provide public schools as compared to private schools that tend to charge far higher school fees. So our side ensures access. Why is this important? First, because we ensure access to accurate news, and secondly, because we have a diverse range of news like in media, like TV shows. Second argument about how our side enriches the quality of media. So what are the structural flaws of private media? We think they are often very sensationalist, and that's why we need a counterweight of the governments in this arena. Because the profit incentive forces the hands of private media. They have to fill in a 24-hour news cycle. And this is not easy to over-sensationalize news stories to get more clicks on their pages. They have to fill a 24-hour news cycle race to get stories. This is what gives them less fact-checking in the status quo. And a good example of this is the 2016 presidential election, where they focus on the clothes of Hillary Clinton or her email scandals as opposed to substandard policy platforms of different people running for political office. So, people in their world are currently being forced to watch extremely partisan news because of the incentive of the media to over-sensationalize these news. This is what contributed to the huge political polarization that characterizes today's political scenes. Our side changes this in a few ways. First, we cater to people who want neutral programming, and recognize that on our side, governments have every incentive to be even-handed, and recognize that existing inclinations to consume sensationalist news is not inherent in people. The only reason we do so is because we have been fed a diet of this news, and that's what has led us to consume this news. It's not because we inherently only want to read sensationalist news. Second, in the long term, we change the diet of people and the news that people are being fed, and that's why our side ensures there is less political polarization and more constructive discourse that exists in society today. For all of these reasons, public information should not be monopolized by private profit. We stand very firmly in opposition.
7 minutes, 57 seconds. I'd like to thank the first speaker of the opposition for their speech, and would like to invite the second speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
Ready? I want to start the speech with two key clarifications that are very important in adjudicating this round. First, both sides acknowledge that there are more private media organizations along with their stance. The distinction between the two sides then is that we would only want privately run media organizations versus their side would want a state-run one and a coexistence with the private-run ones. This means two things. Firstly, that you should judge this debate based on which side brings more persuasive, unique benefits or harms of state-run media on their side. Our side has uniquely told you that the state-run narrative is toxic, and oftentimes it has the disproportionate power to crowd out other media sources that they want to champion on their side of the house. Second, it means that when their major benefit that they hang their case on is cheaper, more accessible media, this is something that should be valued far less at the point in which if we can prove to you that private-run organizations also have the profit incentive to provide cheaper, accessible media, then their point falls. Their analysis about how news is so sensationalized on our side is a concession then. Because if it is not a concession, then a lot of sensationalization would happen on private-run medias and state-run medias on their side too.
But if sensationalization someone doesn't happen on their side, they're conceding to the fact that state-run media can crowd out private-run media sources and become the dominant force in there. That is the only scenario in which their benefit about sensationalization stands. Second clarification. The types of democracies that we're talking about in this debate. We recognize on side proposition that there's a spectrum, right? There are good, accountable ones in status quo. In these countries, citizens are more likely to be informed, they're more likely to reach out to other news sources before making up their political or social choices. That means that both the benefits and the harms of both sides are mitigated slightly in this case. But let's look at the bad ones, the less accountable ones, the shaky ones. In these nascent and developing democracies, citizens are more likely to be coerced at the point at which the state has disproportionate power over those citizens. That's the point at which all our harms still stand. They have no benefits on their side of the house. Two questions to refute. First, what is the purpose of media? Second, how do we better democracy? First, what is the purpose of media? No, thank you. We were a side that was against media censorship and media that was true to the will of the people. We told you a lot about how the government can sway media by stopping the subsidization of it, by intimidating reporters, by intimidating the institution as a whole, by crowding out other media sources, by disproportionately subsidizing one media source and actually making that media source delegitimize other media sources. How we can get investigative journalism on their side of the house. This was not responded to, and the only response that we get is, well, your side supports no regulation on private media sources at all. This is not what my first speaker said. Of course we can support things like a ban or a ban on like fake news or hate speech in the media sources. I think regulations at that point is fine. What did they bring to you under this idea of the purpose of media? First, that there should be good quality, cheap media news that is accessible to all, and that the state is a unique actor that can provide this sort of media. First, I'm wondering why I can't just log on to NewYorkTimes.com and read the news from there. At the point in which state-run media and private-run media can both be accessible in the 21st century, where we can access it on the internet, I don't see a problem with that. But second, if these private-run organizations are so so motivated by profit incentives, they have every incentive to lower the prices as much as possible. Why? Because there are so many competitors. And competition means that news has elastic demand. That means that if prices go up, then there will be a disproportionate loss of audience that will go to alternatives that exist, like other cheaper media sources. But third, in the age that we live in today, where there's a rise of citizen journalism, and journalism that is very democratized and dispersed other means, we don't think that accessibility is the benefit that you hang their case on their side of the house. Second, they talked about how news becomes better quality, how it's less sensationalized. I'll take it in 1 second. First, we still think that the news will be sensationalized by the state at the point in which they can sensationalize news media that is disadvantageous to the opposition parties or opposition political ideologies. But second, we can still support things like fact-checking. Go ahead.
Recognize that many mechanisms on your side, such as citizen journalism or alternative media outlets, means that arguments on government abuse on your side are unlikely to be the case on both sides of the house.
Okay, so the question is, in the context, like I explained in my introduction, in the context that other sources of media exist, which side brings more unique harms on their side of the house? We're saying that if state runs a media organization, they're more likely to take power away from things like citizen journalism. They have to defend that harm on their side of the house. Second question then, how do we better democracy? I told you a very strong principle, that state has power right now, and without checks and balances, power can beget power in the future. And the media is a unique mechanism to provide this check on this powerful force that we call our state. That the state's power is illegitimate unless the people's vote is informed. All they said was, well, these states will still be very neutral because they don't want to alienate the voting population. This is unresponsive to the nuance that we gave in first speaker, which is that they will alienate a minority of the population in order to strengthen their support for the majority. That is something that they need to respond to on their side of the house. Third argument, how we prevent backsliding. This policy is the best way to prevent democratic states from reverting back to authoritarianism. Why is this argument important? Recognize that democracy is the prerequisite of any benefit that their side brings to you in today's case. That means that if there are fewer democratic states that exist on their side of the house, then their benefits are significantly reduced. There are a number of mechanisms for this. Firstly, polarization of the media. If a state that has the incentive to garner more political support in their own population owns a media source, they have every incentive to demonize opposition parties, otherize a particular ethnicity, race, or social class, and delegitimize other political ideologies. We see this currently in the Spanish government, when the government-sponsored media demonizes Catalonians as traitors and delegitimizes what they want in the political sphere. The impact is this: there's increased hate and segregation in society, but there's increased instability and precedent for the government to take stronger control of the public. Notice all the authoritarian states that were once democracies back in World War II. Mussolini, Hitler, all these people rose to power, and their first step was to take control of the media. Before, the media was not run by the state, and they had diverse sources of discourse. Second, they attacked rival institutions that put the government in check. This looks like attacking the legitimacy of the judicial system, or the judges on the judicial system, or the parliamentary system as a whole, by spreading toxic rhetoric about how it's a constant deadlock, how it's inefficient, so that the public can be brainwashed into thinking that efficiency is what they should prioritize. But the second, they crowd out other media sources. A, economically, by giving them subsidies, by buying up other sources and encouraging them to collude with each other. But second, intimidating them from the state, or corrupting them by giving them money in the back door. That means that there is fewer media organizations to challenge the power of the state. But third, they often use the media to mobilize the population against an exterior threat. In times of military crisis, a war, or a campaign, these state-run media sources spread propaganda that say we need to unite and we need to support the government against this exterior threat. But fourth, they stifle political dissent at the point in which they can selectively feature news sources of dissent, where they can shut out instances of revolt, violence by the state, and imprisonment of political dissenters. The comparative is this: these governments are bad on both sides of the house. Side opposition will give them a powerful tool that they can reach out to the vast majority of the population so that they can brainwash them, they can influence them and control them. On our side, we say no to that. If the government wants to be authoritarian, they have to be met by dissent, counter-narratives, and increased dissent by the public. We're very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the second speaker of the proposition, and would like to invite the second speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
So second prop clarifies that they want regulation because governments can ban fake news. The reason why that concession is important in adjudicating the debate is because they concede that the risk of government overreach is not a reason to stop doing something that is practically good. I can imagine plenty of governments manipulating what fake news is like and creating their own version of reality. The reason why they still stand for that is because they admit that government overreach is not a risk that outweighs immediately all of the practical ways in which this policy takes place. Now, the third speaker would probably say this debate can't be about extreme governments where governments manipulate the definition of fake news. That's exactly our point. This debate cannot be about extreme governments that manipulate the media outlets they run and own in such a pernicious manner. They must deal with the majority of where this debate takes place. They have not done that. I want to talk about two things. First, the principle. Second, the practical. First, the principle. Note that principle is not actually a principle for government separation. It's more a principle for a political intervention in the news outlets that you have. Recognize, our first response is that this policy and this principle doesn't actually fall to either side, because we pointed out that the politicization and the intervention of political interest is going to happen on their side. Look, Rupert Murdoch, who literally owns so many global media outlets, literally donates thousands of dollars to the Republican Party every year. I would suggest that they don't win this principle either, because it is not true that in the majority of cases, they cut out any politicization of news. Examples you gave you in the first speaker, not dealt with. Our second response is that obviously, outside cannot be standing for totalitarian states. So I think it's pretty telling that the second speaker's argument is examples of Hitler and Mussolini. So like somewhere in their prep they decided that it would be fair to make opposition stand for North Korea. But evidently, I don't think the CAP wanted us to stand for North Korea when they set this motion. Obviously, we told you that the point is that governments can own and run media outlets. But this is not about taking taking over every single media outlet. So their argument of how taking over every single media outlet is the first step to authoritarianism clearly does not apply, because our policy is not taking over every media outlet. We believe in complementary roles of each outlet. The most sensible line they raise is that, but you concede by the idea of sensationalization that the media outlet run by the government will become the dominant force. No, that's not true. If anything, we think we diversify the range of options people have to turn to. So if it's really so true that the government media outlet is so manipulative, that people will just choose to look at citizen journalism. Like face it, is that governments will shut down citizen journalism. Exactly, that's our point. If you want to debate on the most autocratic of states, they will shut down citizen journalism every way. They will just shut down all media outlets on either side. So the debate clearly has to take place in states where governments allow private media organizations. And we think in these cases, private media organizations that have money, that have donors, for example, often can challenge government-run media outlets. So for instance, the BBC is a good example. I think, for example, the BBC is run by the British government, but there are also so many other private media organizations in Britain. The reason why this stands in reality is because in reality, it is not just one dominant government media organization, but complementing all of these. So they say we don't deal with their 5 mechanisms. Yes, because the 5 mechanisms are undergirded by the common premise that governments are shutting out all common discourse. And anyway, if you believe in your 5 mechanisms, you cannot stand for regulation of fake news. Because equally, the idea of me threatening to not subsidize you equally applies to me threatening to sue you for fake news. So you concede that your 5 mechanisms are not a reason not to do our policy. Before I move on, sure.
If your best benefit is accessibility of the media, in your best countries where the democracy is very accountable, there is likely to be other sources that make news accessible.
Oh no, for example, we think many cases, and this nicely brings me on my second contention on access, okay? So I'll just rebut this point here. So they say a few things. The internet and citizen journalism. Our argument is that we want more good quality programming that is offered by governments. Look, the idea of citizen journalism, while sounding nice in practice, is often hugely unregulated in the status quo. We think it's a good thing when governments can fact-check their own media outlets rather than rely on citizen journalism, who, if you want to be a famous citizen journalist, tend to sensationalize their stories, as opposed to governments who are a lot more responsible. This is not a marginal benefit, as they say. We think it's a huge benefit when people on the ground aren't duped by fake media outlets that only want to sensationalize and create profit. Look, we admit there may be some good private media outlets, but our first biggest mechanism, not dealt with, is that many of these are out of the reach of the common people. The idea of how New York Times and The Economist have put up paywalls to access their articles online, giving that contextualization of the internet. The idea of how, if you want a cable TV subscription, you have to pay $100 a month to just get good movies on HBO. All of this means that media outlets are out of reach of the common man in terms of good quality programming. Particularly because if you recognize that if you're a profit-making media outlet who wants to, for example, still remain free, you often depend on clickbait advertising. So we think that's a bad thing that decreases the quality of media outlets. And again, I don't get why they stand and say that this is an important thing that is a marginal benefit. Because fake news and the sensationalization of media literally changed the whole 2016 US presidential election. I think it's a huge impact on our side when we have practical benefits. Also note that they never actually dealt with our argument on the idea of sensationalism. And note that again, this kind of deals with their second speaker's argument on backstudy, because one of their arguments was polarization as a tier of this. We told you how many people do want neutral programming, but the only reason why this doesn't stand currently is because we are fed a diet of sensationalism, monopolized by many media outlets that believe in this sensationalism. On our side, we ensure that we can change that diet because government media outlets can, for example, fact-check, they can ensure there are neutral political shows, all the arguments that were not dealt with. So again, they can't just call this a marginal practical benefit, because then I can say the principle is a marginal principal benefit as well. They need to deal with our actual analysis of how we have huge benefit. My argument further pushes on this. My constructive argument is public trust in media outlets, and I'm going to show you why is it, and this is my best ground. Even if the best solution is good private media outlets, we encourage people to turn to these good private media outlets, whereas currently they distrust these good private media outlets on their side. The first thing I want to clarify is that our case certainly does not involve governments taking over everything in the media outlet. Like we clearly said in first, there is a difference between the civil service and the state that is run. And I think their POI on election bodies falls to us, because democratic states run election bodies. The election body is still independent. Just because the democratic state runs something doesn't mean it's linked to the incumbent party. Similarly, we told you the idea of how public schools are run, but curriculums are not set by the party in power. It's very clearly an example that falls to our side. But not even if we deal with their best case on the idea of governments that have overreached and are still trying to do this, we think it's much better on our side, because we at least really delegitimize the rhetoric that currently stands, that many outlets are owned by rich people who only care about liberal interests. We think the idea of an independent state-run entity on our side is more likely to appeal to, for example, supporters of Trump. Because currently supporters of Trump say that the liberal establishment controls these media outlets. Now, I know they're going to say, but on your side, the establishment controls them as well. Before I move on to show you why that's not true, sure.
Which is the better comparative then? This media outlet is run by a liberal, or this media outlet is run by the liberal government?
Which is the whole point. You need to deal with our framing of how this is not run by the liberal government, but run by the state as a civil service entity as a whole. So very clearly, you need to respond to that in your next speaker. Election bodies are run by the civil service, they are still run by the state, but they are not run by the incumbent party. So, they are misconstruing this debate entirely. I am not sure that they track this debate. So, back to my argument on how it's extreme and how many of these people often don't trust the media. We create a change on our side because it's run by the state. The second idea, this is more important, is the idea of moderates. We think many of moderates are turned away from news outlets because of the idea that it is hugely filled with fake news and the lack of fact-checking. Now, no, that even if that argument is that many liberal media outlets or good media outlets, for example, the New York Times and Economist, even if these are accessible to people on the ground, and we don't think they are, many people choose not to access them because they don't believe in this idea of news outlets as a whole. We change it on our side when governments clearly regulate their government media outlets with strict standards on fact-checking, with strict standards on programming, with strict standards on media content that encourages people to turn to a diverse range, not just government run, but private media outlets as well. Our argument from the first speaker was clear. We should not allow governments to have a monopoly. We should ensure that governments are able to break the monopoly of private profit via posts.
8 minutes or seconds. So I'd like to thank the second speaker of the opposition and of the opposition, and would like to invite the first speaker of the proposition to speak.
Any benefits that opposition talks about in terms of competition have to be weighed against the value of choice, something that we do not engage with enough. We say even if there's better quality information, but the premise of that information is false and politicized, that information ceases to be valuable. But we say that democracy only works when information is accurate, when someone can cast an informed vote, and that is a value that we've stood for down our bench. Before I get into my three themes, I want to point out a couple strategic errors in Hawke's case. Firstly, their model was incredibly unrealistic compared to how the vast majority of public media organizations are currently run, where they're not run by civil servants, where there's not a variety of information. They can't just fiat that these organizations are going to be run perfectly when we give you a variety of countervailing incentives as to why that is actually highly implausible. Second strategic error. They only engaged with the grounds that are most favorable for them when they only spoke about democracies like Britain, and not the kind of developing democracies that we wanted to discuss. So they can accuse us of doing that because actually our case engaged with both sides of the spectrum. We explained why even in developed democracies, there are always going to be perverse incentives to disproportionately subsidize companies that are run by our own government. So we were actually more nuanced team in this debate. Before I get into my three themes, first about who gets better variety of news, secondly about who gets better quality of news, thirdly about who upholds democracy, I want to respond to the argument about trust that we got from their previous speaker. A couple things to say. So one, unconditional trust in the media when the premise of that information is false is actually something that is incredibly harmful. Even if the government is discreet, they can often manipulate someone to trust in the media, even if the kind of things that they're broadcasting are false. That is actually incredibly coercive, and we do not stand for short-term trust. But secondly, in the long term, we do concede that trust in the media can be good, but that is actually worse under their side of the house. There are a couple reasons for this. One, they get back and forth accusations of politicized media under their side of the house, where the government who wants to prop up their own organization will have an incentive to accuse opposition media of being politicized, where opposition media will include the state media of just being beholden to the establishment if any checks and balances actually exist. So when we want to get more non-partisan media, that's actually when people have greater trust. But secondly, governments have a direct incentive to post a significant amount of fake news within the media that is going to correspond with their own political ideology. When you get information that isn't necessarily accurate, and governments aren't going to lose money when there isn't fact-checking, fake news creates scandals that decrease trust in the media in the long term. And now I want to get into the first theme about which side gets better variety of news. The major claim that we got from them was that we need competition, and that can only happen when we get government-run media. My first response to this is, their entire case was predicated on the idea that government media is never going to run for profit or run at a surplus. I have absolutely no idea why that premise is true, and if it isn't, a lot of their benefits about competition actually fall. But secondly, this argument is also hung on the idea that governments are the only actor who can actually create access to free media. We got a response to this from our second speaker about how theme of this debate about quality of news. And the first thing we get from them is that profit incentives tend to lead to more sensationalized news. To that we say, one, profit incentive actually doesn't lead to sensationalized news, because to maximize your own profit, you're going to want to get as many people viewing your news as possible. I mean, they actually aren't going to want to have that much politicized news so that you're able to maximize your own viewer base. It's actually when news isn't running at for profit per their model, you get the most sensationalized news. Because government and civil servants, someone has some kind of reason or incentive for running this news in the first place. They'll probably be want to be ideologically tied to a particular thing so they can still get their agenda out. They're probably going to want to be politicized in some way so they can still have the incentive to actually propagate this news in the first place. But even if you buy, though, that the incentives of private news is imperfect, that has to be weighed against all of the countervailing incentives about government that are so problematic that we talk about. Things like the lack of investigative journalism. So even if private is bad, you have to weigh that against everything that we gave you in first speaker about the mechanisms. The responses that we got to what we gave you in first speaker were providing mitigating factors as to how there's still going to be some kind of checks and balances. I want to look at these and explain why it's actually not true. The first thing that they said is that there's always going to be some kind of robust opposition party that exists. One, even if there is, but they don't have media that is insufficient. But two, in many democracies there actually is one really dominant party. We give you the example of the PRI in Mexico, or even the major party in Japan, who was dominant for an extended period of time. Next they say, what about the ballot box? The ballot box can't work if you can adequately assess whether representation is actually serving your own needs, because the government is continually biased in the way that they represent news. The fact that the BBC is the best example for their side of the house, but often they're not actually critical enough of Theresa May's Brexit policies. So if you don't have enough information, the ballot box is not a mechanism that actually works. Finally, what they said is that people can just turn to civilian journalism. We got this under second speaker. Often states try and do this in an incredibly manipulative and discreet way, so people do not even buy into the fact that they are being forced. And also, if you're like ideologically tied to a certain government, you're probably going to want to keep receiving information that you already agree with and not actually turn to other sources of news. But even if you ultimately buy that quality is better off under their side of the house, you have to weigh all of their benefits of quality against everything that we have explained about maximizing choice in democracy. There are a couple of reasons as to how you're always going to win that comparative. Firstly, the quality of information does not matter if the premise of that information is false in the first place, if what people are giving is not actually accurate. But secondly, any vote in democracy ceases to be meaningful the point at which people are not actually making a decision based on what represents their own needs most effectively. The fact that you are voting for a party because you're being fed information that they're good, even if, as a voter, your best interest would be voting for the opposition. So insofar as people are casting uninformed votes under the status quo because of biased media, we see that any benefits of quality is insufficient in winning that comparative. And now we're going to look at the final thing in this debate, but first let's take a POI.
So if you believe that this debate is about illiberal governments that have bad incentives or nascent democracies, what does your side stand for regulation on fake news? Clearly you admit this debate cannot take place in that situation.
Okay, so we think that this debate takes place in both democracies because unlike we acknowledge that democracy exists on a spectrum, often democracies are naked, and we have to talk about those as well. So final thing in this debate about the principle of democracy. Our first speaker gave you a fairly well-developed principle about how the media inherently exists to challenge the power of government. The only response we really got to this is that private individuals are still going to have their own ideologies. That is uncomparative, because even if someone is politically tied to a certain idea, they're never going to have the same kind of power to emphasize an ideology within society as an entire government who literally can influence ideology through things like their own budget. So the government still has a greater hold on ideology. Thus, the principle still stands, number one, that the purpose of the media is to challenge government, but number two, they never adequately responded to the idea that it is principally insufficient to force opposition voters to sacrifice their own free speech rights to support things that they don't actually believe in. They tried to say, what about public services? Everyone benefits from public services, and their own free speech rights aren't being violated. But secondly, we also explained about how we better uphold democracy in the long run, particularly in nascent states. They tried to frame this out of this debate without actually engaging with the mechanisms that our second speaker gave you about things like state propaganda. If we can prevent one democracy from backsliding into authoritarianism, that upholds the choice of millions of people within our country. And on that basis alone, because you're better able to preserve the principle of democracy, I'm proud to stand this proposition.
I'd like to thank the speaker of the opposition and would like to invite the speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
opposition speaker, their side again admitted that they can regulate fake news and can stand for regulation on news organizations. Let's just note this very crucial concession here. This means, again, we have told you from first speaker, this debate cannot be about illiberal governments that are backsliding. This debate cannot be about governments that want to now take over the entire country and free reign over media. And the reason why this is the case is because even they admit that democratic check and balances and regulation also equally work as well. I'm going to ask two questions into this debate. The first, what is the relevant comparative that this debate should be judged on? And second, on access. And unfortunately, I do need to spend some time on the first argument on comparatives because that was literally the entire debate that happened before me. Let's just take out a few red herrings that their side said. The first red herring they gave us was to note that on our side, we cannot have private companies. Yes, we can. The motion does suggest that we can have media companies and private companies as well. And note, this argument also undercuts a lot of benefits that their side stands for as well. Because if the governments equally want to abuse the entire system, they will close down private companies on their side of the house as well. So the comparative on both sides is that there will be no private companies if you buy their idea of government abuse. So they need to accept that on both sides, there will be private companies as well. So this is something that's very important that their side just never dealt with throughout the debate. The next more nuanced argument they gave was that this would be crowded out. They gave a response in second speaker that they never dealt with. Let me bring to you what these ideas are. First, we feel that they'll have many viewers because they are sensationalistic in nature. So we don't think that there will be a huge crowding out effect. We told you often they have a huge quantity of viewers, and these viewers watch for a very long time. So if they are able to just get the attention and market share of that small niche group of viewers, they are able to operate sufficiently. Like Fox News, I'm pretty sure most people don't buy into it, but that doesn't mean that they are not making the most profit right now in America, because you recognize that it's watch time that's equally important, not just how vast your watching population is. Second, also recognize that many owners are rich, so they'll continue to operate as a vast media presence, even if there's like a government intervening in it. Crucially, if you don't buy these analytical arguments, we pointed out that the only country that has only government-run state media organizations is North Korea. So unless you want to debate on the one country of 191 countries, I suggest you need to stand for countries like the BBC. Sure, they will not be completely fair in their view, they will not be completely fair in how they want Theresa May. But the point is that they are way more neutral than any other organization. It was like Malaysia, for example, with RTM, their state broadcaster, and Astro, their private company providing alternative voices. So note, the vast majority of this debate occurs when there are private companies providing the equal countervailing check and balance on the government as well. The next idea and false premise they want to throw us was the idea of the civil service being ineffective. Let's just note that there's a distinction between the political government and the civil service. The civil service runs and operates to ensure that things go well. Governments only create laws as legislature. What are these ideas we told you from first speaker? We told you about how there's a Chinese wall, for example. What does this mean in first speaker? This meant we told you very clearly from the start, there's a distinction between individuals governments who fund the company and people who operate the company, and they don't want to be seen as independent. We're giving you mechanisms like laws or journalistic unions that want to protect press freedom as well. All of this will lead to strong pushback when there's interference on their side of the house. So even if a liberal government takes over and tries to run liberal agendas, A, people can see through the ballot box, but B, there will be strong pushback from laws and journalistic unions. No thank you. The new response in third speaker was to tell us a new framework, increasingly illiberal governments that are backsliding. First of all, this is the minority of this debate. They need to defend the majority of this debate, but this debate is not about illiberal governments. No thank you. But let's take them at their highest grounds and deal with what exactly the incentives of these governments are. If we really are to talk about illiberal governments, I have three responses here. First, it makes no sense for them to open up a new news channel altogether that might threaten their democracy. Second, their solution will be to crack down on citizen journalists as well as existing media organizations, not to let new organizations crop up. So even if we buy their argument that they are illiberal governments, their mechanism will not be to open up new organizations or run and operate them. So I think that's basically their argument dealt with. Before I move on to the second contention, access, sure.
Do you support the Japanese government censoring news about war crimes during World War II through its state-run media and preventing other media from doing the same?
Okay, so there's the NHK in Japan, the state broadcaster that might do this. But again, this example falls to us because we told you there are many other news organizations on our side that equally can provide other news organizations as well, other information as well. In Japan, for example, there are other private broadcasters equally, as opposed to just NHK, their public broadcaster. So yes, we have said that maybe in their best case scenario, some governments can hide certain facts. A, we already know mechanistically why this is unlikely to happen. But even if we buy that frame, insofar as private organizations exist on our side, this means, once again, that you have all information published as well. No thank you. Let's then move on to the argument on access. which NASDAQ basically didn't want to deal with as well. Our claim for first speaker was very clear. We told you that it was very expensive to access news and other media. We gave you mechanisms to show why this is true. They were about paywalls, for example, or the fact we need to buy a set-top box in many countries to access private media. Their rebuttal was very glib in first speaker to 3 minutes of my first speaker's analysis. What did they say? They said they'll just lower the prices. No, I think that often there's a limit to how low we can lower it, but even their best case when it's free, when you have Google, for example. The point is, Google doesn't tell you what is high quality media or not. If I go search for Trump, your first article might be from Breitbart.com. And I told you the unique problem with free media is that they're also of a low quality. In order to get money from advertisers, for example, they need to have clickbait articles with also very low quality so that they can attract more people. So even if you said that they're free media, they're of a low quality, which was our case, that individuals need to access high quality content and not low quality content. And the mechanism in our best case of free media, no thank you, does not stand. Hence, people do deserve it now. What did they concede when they dropped this point? They conceded, first of all, that individuals deserve high quality media. It's not just news, right? They expanded the debate to talk about media like movies and TV shows. Again, no response from their side. So their next speaker in reply need to tell us why it's okay for people to not have access to good quality media. But their only response to this was to tell us that it's not important because the majority, only a majority benefit from it. First of all, let's just point out that in many circumstances like healthcare, sure, not everyone will fall ill, touch wood, I don't want to fall ill either, but surely I also want to pay for healthcare insurance to ensure that in the event that I do need it, I get it as well. So the metric of whether or not governments provide information or provide access to materials and services is not whether or not everyone gets it, or whether or not a majority of people deserve and need it. And doing that media was something that people deserve and needed as well. Having proven this, I've proven to you a few things. First, their argument on government, like illiberal government, do not stand. But crucially, even on outside the house, you provide crucial access to media that I hope that reply speaker does rebut, although it's way too late. Their only response to all of this was to tell us that the premise of the information is false, so you cannot fund it. Again, we gave you structural analysis from first to show why governments are unlikely to do this. We show how there are multiple checks and balances from internal pressures, such as journalists, and external pressures, such as voters, to ensure that the premise of information is true. Again, we do this also during the vast majority of the debate that also focuses on other things, right? Such as, for example, media and TV shows. At the end of the debate, let's just look what their side actually dropped. They dropped a few things. First, they dropped the idea of comparative political biases. The comparative on their side is that, sure, they might have good information, but people are shouting over each other, so no one sees the correct information as well. That's a comparative that their side never defended from first. Crucially, that means that even if there's bias, you cannot trace who the bias comes from. Again, it's too late to defend our second speaker argument or trying to make media organizations appear transparent or for you to trust the media. This only happens when they're able to trace crucially where the media and information comes from. So at the end of the debate, let's just make it very clear that they need to defend their majority burden of democratic states, not just one or two countries that are backsliding or one or two countries that only have state media as a mechanism. At the end of the day, we recognize that public information should not be monopolized by private profit real posts, and it's way too late for them to come up with any new rebuttal.
8 minutes, 14 seconds. I'd like to thank the first speaker of the opposition and would like to invite the vice speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
Here's a very simple thought experiment to understand the flaws in Proposition's case. So let's take the statement, democracies should hold elections. Now I think most of us agree that that's a pretty good thing. But Proposition would probably run the argument that in Turkey, if you hold elections, Erdogan can use the election to legitimize his bad policies. That in liberal governments will manipulate the elections and end up legitimizing their own rule. But I think most of us will still admit that the statement on the whole is probably true. Democratic states should hold elections. And the reason why that is the case is because we realize that Proposition is debating on the margins. They are not dealing with the majority of cases we set up, that the majority of the debate has to be about responsible states and how they will use these mechanisms for positive outcomes, similar to how they use elections for positive outcomes in the status quo. So it's far too late that in reply they suddenly give this majority, because down the line they have not dealt the majority of where this debate takes place. So I want to look at the two worlds that emerge at the end of this debate and understand how the world of Proposition is a bad world. Know that we told them on their highest ground. even if this debate is about illiberal democracies, the field and the countries of illiberal democracies fall to neither side. Because in the world of proposition, they equally abuse media outlets. They themselves said they can have regulations in their world on fact-checking. But in the case in that illiberal government, where the government somehow is able to manipulate the constitution and manipulate the way in which things are happening, then you will manipulate the definition of fake news anyway. So, even if this debate is about liberal governments, and we don't think it is, that point falls to neither side, because illiberal governments will continue to do this. In fact, they will just shut down citizen journalism, they will decide what is fake news. Furthermore, we told you, therefore, in their world, the world they stand for is largely a world in which in non-liberal, i.e. liberal democracies, people do not have access to important information. Literally, the responses and the alternatives in their world are unresponsive. They say you have to Google. Our response from first was that Google is often monopolized by the idea of bad news when you're unable to get past paywalls. They say you have the New York Times. Yes, the New York Times allows me to read 5 free articles a month, and beyond that I have to pay a subscription. They say you can have citizen journalism. We say citizen journalism is often ineffective because it's often sensationalist and not fact-checked. So down the line, they find alternatives, but we rebutted them consistently, and it is too late. Their proposition reply wants to be the first speaker for them to justify these alternatives. And no, we told you, the lack of access to good information is a significant outcome. It was what changed the 2016 presidential election. It is what is, in other words, destroying democracy around the globe. We think they cause more backsliding. One thing that we told you, that they are sensationalists in their world. We told you how when you have private media outlets, they move towards the side. Note that by third speaker, their world was a shrinking world. Because they said, if we can prevent one democracy from backsliding, we win the debate. That is not their burden. They have to show us why in the majority of cases, they are able to produce access that is good for democracy. So what is therefore the word of opposition? The word of opposition is a better word. We understood that we want the principle because recognize that political people like Rupert Murdoch are going to be influential in the media scene anyway. The question is, are we able to trace it more easily at the point at which we have a government media outlet? And that is what we have. We can trace political biases. So on the idea of the 5 mechanisms, we actually win that because we win that point. More importantly, we told you how the realistic pace in which the debate occurs happens when there are other private media outlets that can check on the government. We dealt with the examples of Japan and the NHK. We told you about Malaysia. We told you about the UK. We told you how on all of these majority states, in many cases, government media outlets run complementary to private media outlets, and that's what we have. We recognize that even in the case of illiberal democracies tend to have separation of powers in the civil service. They tend to have constitutional checks. They tend to have a robust opposition presence. They tend to have the ballot box. All mechanisms we gave you from first that we told you why the government media outlets on our side will be positive. We told you the distinction between the civil service and the government, and how on our side we create media outlets that are accessible. We create media outlets that are neutral and not sensationalist. That was the majority burden they did not deal with. They say democracy is premised on accurate information, and we agree. But our world is a world that creates the accurate information. It is too late if they rebut that in reply. We understood that public information should not be monopolized by private profit. We oppose.
4 minutes, 11 seconds. I'd like to thank the reply speaker of the opposition, and I'd like to invite the reply speaker of the proposition to finish off the debate.
Judges, it is not too late for you to check your flow. It is not too late for you to understand that down their bench, they manipulated our entire case and tried to pretend that this debate was only in full-fledged democracies. If they want to pretend that by the definition of full-fledged democracy, that's only who we're talking about, the United States is not considered a full-fledged democracy because there's not enough checks and balances that are considered reliable by the people. They wouldn't be considering India a democracy. They wouldn't be considering any nascent democracy that holds votes any sort of democracy. Do not let them misframe this case for you. This was not a debate about how in the most idealistic utopian countries that the civil service is not paid by the government for some reason are going to be able to access media. This was about the comparative, about whether or not we enable states to garner a monopoly, not only current states that use the media well, but future states that are likely to use it to counter policy. So what am I going to do in my reply? I'm going to look at this debate under a few key themes. Firstly, I'm going to make some clarifications, and then I'm going to talk about the quality of media, the purpose of media, and the accessibility of media, since that's what they focus the majority of their speeches on. So first of all, let's underline a fundamental assumption that they never actually proved on their side. They talked about how this debate is all about the civil service, about how these individuals have no incentive to do anything that the government tells them because there's a difference between the government owns it or runs it and there's a civil service. So first of all, we think the mechanisms I gave you in my first speech were unresponded to. The fact that the government can appoint the CEOs or managers of these news organizations that can incentivize them to run pro-government policy. Notice that it still applies in their utopian world that only engages with full-fledged democracies. The fact that these governments are still in charge. Secondly, the fact that they are just paying these news organizations, responsible for the salaries of reporters, and that that will always be in their minds, even if there isn't the direct coercion. So let's move into their first idea about accessibility. Note that we told you down the bench that this is only a benefit in the absolute best states. How accessibility does not matter unless you can access quality with that accessibility. So what did we tell you on their highest ground? We told you in scenarios that they described where they will collude to set high prices. This will be out of reach, that there are other mechanisms. Every debater in this room had access to Google to look up all the facts that we are using. We have had abilities to access news articles. It is erroneous for them to say that nobody has access in these best states that they were characterizing. Also, they told you that there are monopolies that exist in private firms, and this is the most important thing they told you to characterize, is that the government has to be responsible. Notice that this acknowledges that monopolies are fundamentally harmful. And if we prove to you in this debate that we have more monopolies of government power and government responsibility, they lose. So let's talk about the quality of media, because this is where this debate really hinged. Because acknowledge that both sides wanted individuals to be able to access media. Both sides wanted individuals to be able to vote in informed ways. What side gets better quality? We talked to you about a variety of states, but most importantly, we talked about government monopoly. They said this assumes that there's only going to be one media source, but that is not true. Check your flow, look at my analysis. I said that individuals are more likely to get pushed out of this media area because of the government. That the government can disincentivize certain behavior or flood the market by super funding their own corporation, meaning that it is so hard to start up costs. But secondly, we told you about in the worst case scenarios how these nascent democracies use subtle state coercion. They said that people will be able to discern between good and bad news. Notice this contradicts their entire point about sensationalism. Because if it is true that individuals can discern between good and bad news, theoretically their harms about sensationalism shouldn't exist. So what is the crux of this debate? We've described that regardless of the current state that an organization is in, there can be access to news in the best states. So this is about preventing the absolute monopoly of these individuals. This is about ensuring legitimacy, checks and balances, and free and fair elections in the long term. Ladies and gentlemen, they never engaged in this. They didn't want to because they knew they would lose on it. We are proud to oppose.